let's see. I worked out like One Punch Man the other day. That was fun.
I'm confused.
Do you know what One Punch Man is?
Yeah, but worked out like One Punch Man? What does that mean?
So I like One Punch Man. My girlfriend and I watched all of the second season the other weekend, a couple weekends ago. If you're a fan of One Punch Man, if you've seen the series, it's kind of like a joke in the series, like how did he get his powers? How is he so strong? How can he beat all these monsters in one punch? And at one point, towards the end of the first season, he finally reveals it in like this really dramatic way that's super underwhelming because he reveals his workout regimen. He's like, it's very important. You've got to train like this every day. And they're like, what is it? Like, how do you have all these powers? It's like, first, you have to do 100 push-ups and then you do 100 sit-ups and 100 squats and you run 5 kilometers every day and don't skip any days. And I did this for 2 years and, blah, blah, blah. I trained so hard I went bald, which is a great line. I trained so hard I went bald. And then, of course, the other characters just lose it. Like, they get super anime mad where, like, their head gets huge and the background changes. And they're just like, that's just a standard training program. How could you possibly get superpowers from that? Anyway. Me and my girlfriend thought it would be fun to do 100 push-ups and 100 sit-ups and 100 squats. And we did not run for 5 kilometers because we ain't got that kind of time. But it was fun. It's both slightly harder than you expect, but also not as you're not going to get superpowers from doing it.
Well, that's why they got anime mad at it.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, Jordan, save it. How are you tying that into the topic for today?
Oh fuck, I didn't think about that part.
Yep. You dug this hole and you got to get out of it now.
No, I'm gonna reset the cold open and say that today's July 5th. It's the day after 4th of July. We don't know how we're gonna release the next couple of episodes. We might have already released the other one, depending on what we decide. But we recorded 2 episodes on July 4th. And this is not how we planned it, but it did just kind of occur to me the other day because there was patriotic shit going on that today's topic sort of in like a weird way meshes on top of something vaguely related to 4th of July for those of you who are in America. I guess what we're talking about today is sort of the idea of, and I use this term in a reserved way because it doesn't fit exactly in the fictional worlds that we're going to be talking about, but conceptually it's kind of like nationalism. If you look at the Dragon Age series, if you look at the Mass Effect series, there is this thematic issue of smaller collective versus larger collective. So in other words, humankind, the human alliance in Mass Effect versus the galactic alliances between all the different species. Ferelden and the Ferelden interests versus all of Thedas. Or Lay versus all of Thedas. Tevinter.
Tevinter versus all of Thedas.
Oh, we'll get into that for sure. I think Dragon Age has a lot of it. I think Dragon Age might even have a bit more than Mass Effect. And so I thought, well, that's just kind of an interesting topic because it's clearly there in the source material and you have to reckon with some of these things in very upfront ways during choices you have to make in the game. And so I thought that would be a fun thing to talk about as far as pros and cons for each approach. I mean, we can start really anywhere. We kind of mentioned Tevinter, so do we want to start in the Dragon Age side of things and kind of talk about maybe the most nationalistic? Is that a good way to characterize it, or is Tevinter the most nationalistic in the Thedas pantheon?
See, I feel like that's complicated because the whole issue with the Venatori is that the Venatori are mad that most of Tevinter has gotten lazy and don't care about how good Tevinter is. So Tevinter, the Venatori essentially is a small group of extremely nationalistic people that want to make Tevinter great again. And
I'm glad you said it. I was so tempted to use that phrase, and I'm glad you did it.
So yeah, it's they decided to rebuild Tevinter with a new god because their old gods weren't. I guess literally old gods weren't talking anymore. So that's kind of what the Venatori is. So I don't know if that makes Tevinter extremely nationalistic because of that whole sect that got pretty big, or not nationalistic enough because the whole sect had to get big and is not actually part of the country officially.
Interesting.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a good point.
In a weird way, I kind of almost I'm trying to think of like one that's even like really like got their shit together.
Has their shit together in what way?
Like, because like Ravane, it's real. Oh, it's the Qun. What am I talking about? It's totally Qun. But like Ravane it's not. Ravane isn't so much a country. Like there is like a one government, but like if you get to the like outside of the main city, it's really just little villages that don't give a shit what the main government thinks. So I feel like that's less nationalistic because it's really just more about their village. It's not about Ravane. It's about wherever they live. Versus like Orlais is mostly like for the Empire and whatnot. But like the Qun, totally everything is all about the Qun. Like the whole basis of belief and religion is about the Qun and the qunari Empire. So I feel like to me that's the winner. But I feel like Orlais also gives them a run for their money.
Yeah, I guess. And so the Qun is really interesting also because the Qun it's a religion, but
not really.
But not really. So it's not a religion. It's a philosophy plus a nation plus a culture. It's everything.
Yes. Because they don't actually worship anything. So it's not like it's a religion. Apparently there is some sort of religion in there, but it's not, but we haven't heard anything about it. So I don't know if they just decided to put that off or what. So yeah, it's like a weird, I can't even think of like a good, like a similar thing in like our society, but it's like it's a complete society. It's the whole package, you know, like everything minus religion, I guess, all into one, and you got to be devoted to it. Otherwise, you're just not even a person anymore.
So this is going to sound like a dumb question that I don't think is actually a dumb question, but it sounds like one. So what's the name of their country then, right? Because Parvalan is not the name of their country, but they have a capital city in Parvalan, right? Cunindar or something like that. So what's that the capital of? Is it the capital of Parvalan?
Yeah, I guess the capital of Parvalan, but it's the Qun is so weird and sticky because let's also be honest, the qunari came from somewhere. There's a qunari homeland somewhere.
Yes,
and we don't know if that's also qunari,
the Kossuth,
so to speak. Well, the Kossuth is also a weird word. The qunari are just so many like questions and hopping around with it. So like we don't know if the qunari homeland is actually of the Qun, or if the Qun were like the weird stepbrothers that got kicked out, and so now like, well, we'll just take over this thing.
Yeah,
like, we don't actually know. So things are kind of interesting with the Qun. And the Qun itself, it really just refers like it literally means the people, you know. So it's in their language, it's just people.
Yeah,
the Qun is people,
right?
So I don't know what what the thing they're devoted to is. It's almost like it's nationalism, but not really so much love for the country as it is love for the people. Like what, like the whole, like your philosophy, your everything.
It's an oddly dogmatic, oddly authoritarian populism. Yeah. Which is weird because you kind of think of those things as being contrary to populism, but they found a way to make it. You're right. The Qun. We could spend the whole goddamn episode just talking about the Qun in this topic because it's so fucking weird. They take converts too. Like a lot of times and they're like zealotous about taking converts. Like a lot of times you think of nationalism as like, you know, Tevinter for Vince kind of thing, right? Like. It's got to be all about the people that are already here, but the Qun is all about taking in people that are not necessarily Kossuth. So that is so interesting that in some sense they act in a way that could be considered the most nationalistic, but their actual nation is kind of a fluid idea.
Mm-hmm. Like wherever they are is their nation. Which kind of also makes them scary because they're like, well, our nation could be anywhere. So we're just going to make it anywhere.
I mean, can we just pause and say, because I'm trying to think. I know there might be some, and I don't even want to get into real world analogs, but just can you think of other things in fiction that are like that? I'm sure, I always say this, fantasy is such a huge genre. I'm sure there's some novel series out there I just don't know about that has something similar, but to me, this strikes me as being a pretty unique.
Now, could we make an argument about the Borg?
Okay, philosophically similar, but they're driven by it's technologically it's I feel like it's different because it's a I don't know, I feel like that's just more it's trying to replicate itself in a sort of like I don't want to say binary, but in a very sort of, what's the word? Machine-like way. It's just trying to replicate itself. Conceptually, I think you're right. You could consider it the same way. I think I just might think of it slightly differently because it's driven by technology.
Maybe. See, here's the thing. I'm not a Star Trek nerd. So, like, I don't know if there is a Borg homeworld, but I feel like you hear about them taking over worlds and, like, they, possess or whatever you do with them, all the people. So they're like, resistance is futile. They're just going to take everything they want because it's what they do. So I feel like it's maybe similar enough, but, like, other than that, I can't really think of anything like it.
Yeah, it's pretty unique. So, like, props to the Dragon Age folks for coming up with something like that.
Mm-hmm. Which I would love to hear if they actually pitch it. Okay, guys, imagine this. Fantasy Borg. Oh, yeah.
Okay, so before we like move off of the qunari to sort of look at some of the other examples, I guess the central question, which I think we could ask with any of these instances, is this working and is it right? So what I mean is it working in the advantage of the qunari and is it morally correct?
See, that's, I guess, the real question of the Qun and qunari, because, like, there's a lot of people who I think even in our... Sorry, I suddenly just got blasted back to the past where I'm remembering a really strange thread on Reddit where some guy was really wanting to come up with, like, a religion based off of the Qun. In the
real world? Oh, good lord.
Yeah, and, like, everyone in the comments is like, what the fuck are you even on about?
Oh, boy.
Sorry, that just came back in my memory. Okay, but, like, there are some people who probably listening right now, it's like, yeah, the Qun doesn't sound that bad. Like, the part of the Qun that they actually talk about in fiction is, like, it brings a lot of comfort, especially to people who's, like, they're just farmers trying to survive, where, like, the Qun does say, like, okay, well, you're going to be the farmer for the rest of your life because you are a farmer, but you'll always have a place to eat, a place to sleep. And, like, for a lot of people, especially in Thedas, where things are so chaotic, that can be very comforting. At the same time, like, how many people have you met in game that were part of the Qun that was like, oh, this is the worst. This is so bad. Get out. So I personally think it's the worst, because I can't imagine a nightmare where, like, based on what I was good at as, like, a 10-year-old, that would be my job for the rest of my life.
Right.
And that would be my name. That would be my whole persona. Like,
right.
That just seems so odd and bizarre and awful. And I don't... that, to me, that seems like a nightmare. Like, and I feel like that's what the Qun represents to a lot of people in fiction. At the same time, I can totally see the argument of people that, like, don't want to struggle and they just kind of want to, like, breeze through life, and so this being the ideal for them. You know what I mean? Yeah,
well, you mentioned that it's comforting. I mean, like, feudalism is comforting in some sense, right? Like, you sort of, you're a serf on a noble's land, you're limited in your, certainly, you have no vertical mobility, that's what you're going to be for the rest of your life, and your children are going to be the same, but you also have limited vertical mobility and that you can't really fall any lower unless the noble gets overthrown.
Yeah.
There's that kind of comfort to it. As long as the Qun is intact, you have a floor that you can't go below.
Yeah.
Even if you're the most pathetic person ever, it doesn't matter. You're still a part of the Qun. You're guaranteed a basic amount of whatever. Yeah, I would side with you in saying that it's morally wrong. The thing that I constantly come back to is Katogen and the idea that this person is so inherently brainwashed that they would rather set themselves on fire than just start living for themselves and make choices for themselves because they think they have no purpose. That's really interesting. It's not just that your free will is taken away by like physical force, like they brainwash people. And if you start to get unbrainwashed, they have the reconditioning stuff. Mm-hmm. Like you'll get rebrainwashed. That's a really horrible idea to take away human or just whatever free will and agency. Mm-hmm. So I would side on morally wrong, but I am very conflicted on the fact that like objectively it is kind of working for them. I mean, like they are gaining ground. They are a force to be reckoned with. They're going too far as how much freedom they're taking away from people. But there is a sort of like utilitarian, Like, they function very efficiently. They are forced to be reckoned with. They are sort of, like you said, spreading wherever they are. They have to sort of be dealt with. And so it's kind of scary to think that, although I think inherently they're morally wrong, they're gaining traction in the world of Thedas, at least by my observation.
Now, because I can already hear people commenting this, I'm playing devil's advocate. Is it morally wrong if people freely give themselves to this idea, though? It's not hurting anybody, Jordan.
Well, they hurt themselves. I mean, if you set yourself on fire, you hurt yourself, right? I mean, that's like...
But they want to do this, Jordan. That's not hurting themselves if they want to do it, right?
It's a good question. It's a very good question. It's absolutely a question that should be asked. I would posit it's a bad idea by my assertion, right? I'm asserting that it's a bad idea. Even if the people spreading the idea don't know that it's a bad idea, again, this is just my assertion. People can attack it or deconstruct it how they want. I would assert that everybody has a responsibility to understand that if the ideas that you subscribe to are bad ideas, and to not spread them and to stop proliferating them if they're bad ideas. And so if you're spreading them, even by free association, even by just convincing other people to adopt your ideas, you are harming them, right? Because ultimately they're going to harm themselves, quote unquote, because they want to, because you spread your bad idea to them. Now, there's a very fine line between freedom of religion, free speech. People have to be able to explore ideas that someone else might think is bad. Right, that's a hard balance to get to. But yeah, I would say, if it's a bad idea and you're spreading a bad idea that ultimately hurts people, you're wrong. I'm too dumb to come up with how you find a way to respect. How do you find a way to balance that while also respecting freedom of religion and freedom of choice? It's really fucking hard. But that's why I love exploring it fictionally, because, I don't think there's very many people in the world of Thedas saying we need to go and wipe out the Qun and the qunari religion.
Well, I don't know about that.
Well, I guess so. I mean,
all of Tevinter and then Sister Patrice, that was her whole deal.
Okay, so you're right. I guess I was thinking more like the rulers of Ferelden and Orlais don't have it at the top of their list. Mm. It's a
everyone next to the qunari people.
And that's not a crazy thing, right? It's a tenuous, not alliance. It's a tenuous situation. What do we do about the Qun? Do we go wipe them out because they're trying to aggressively spread their way of philosophy, or do we kind of respect them as long as they don't attack us directly? It's tough.
Which, the very end of Trespasser, they did try to attack them directly. So
shit's about to hit the fan.
Well, yeah, pretty much all the Dragon Age media that has come out, around Inquisition era, have all been saying, "Hey, those qunari people, they're coming. Even Sten at the end of Origins was like, "I hope I don't see you on the battlefield." What is that? What do you mean, Sten? Oh, the upcoming. Oh, we're coming for you, right? And he's also the Arishok now.
Right. Right.
They're coming. So I almost feel like this is kind of becoming the qunari episode.
Well, what about Tevinter? How's Tevinter different? Because we kind of mentioned Tevinter is almost, we wanted to say, and I have to say, coming into this, I thought we were going to be talking all about Tevinter and how they're the most nationalistic, but they're kind of not, as we've established. But what about Tevinter? How are they kind of different than the qunari?
Well, I would say that Tevinter was the most nationalistic
historically,
and then Andraste happened. And they kind of fell off a little. I mean, it wasn't just Andraste, and Andraste was the one that kind of catalyzed it. I don't know what you would say. And then everything kind of broke apart after that. So in the vague history of Thedas, Thedas was pretty much conquered entirely by Tevinter. You can find Tevinter ruins all over Thedas. And then they enslaved a lot of the population that wasn't the main Tevinters. And Andraste, a slave who was of the Alamari in Ferelden, if I'm remembering correctly. This is going off of memory. I didn't study for this, so this is a test of my knowledge. She rose up from being a slave, and she took her husband, and they essentially gathered a whole bunch of slaves and did a slave rebellion, and marched all the way to Minrathous, and it, after that, her husband, who was jealous, Mafarath, and then the leader of the Tevinter Imperium, betrayed Andraste and kind of had a truce of if you stop marching on Tevinter, we'll release the rest of the lands. You can split them on your sons or whatever. And but you give us Andraste so we can burn her for our people so we feel safe. And that's what happened. So pretty much after a very successful slave rebellion, Tevinter kind of splintered apart into just Tevinter, and then the rest of the lands were divided up into Marathrath's sons, which later became all the major nations. The fact that I know this and not like actual history makes me sad. But so let me get a drink real quick. So Tevinter, as of old, in which there still echoes today, they believe they're the best city or best nation in Thedas, which they kind of are. Like they, at least technologically speaking, like they had the most advanced magic. They had like the most advanced pretty much everything. And unfortunately, everything's also built on slavery. So, I feel like what's going to be coming next for Tevinter is that we're going to have to see, like, okay, is Tevinter going to nix the slavery thing? Because of the whole issue with Calpurnia. Like, Calpurnia, who survives no matter what, is so against slavery, everyone's kind of wondering if she's going to be leading a slave revolt to make Tevinter better. Because in her mind, because I just did this review over, like, her short story that came out, she believes that, you know, slaves should be treated as people, because, you know, she was once a slave. So I don't know, I guess, like, we don't know too much about Tevinter, because I think, like, they've made some things a bit vague so they can address it in Dragon Age 4. So I almost hate talking about Tevinter, because I feel like so much is going to change in between now and when Dragon Age 4 actually released. But
yeah, no, I mean, I guess that is really the big thing, right? They've been historically way more conquerors than anything else before, and now they, in quote unquote recent, you could say, even though it's not that recent. What's the term? Is it Thedosian? How do we say Thedas? Thedosian history.
Like
they are
that.
now sort of pushed back. What about the Chantry in Tevinter? Does that change things? Does that sort of splinter them anymore? Because they have a different version of the Chantry. They've got like a reverse Chantry.
They do, yeah. Now, I will say there has been moves from Tevinter to try and retake land in the bordering countries, and that's what most of the Exalted Marches have been about, is pushing back Tevinter. So yeah, so far the Chantry is the only one keeping Tevinter in check. And the kind of the history behind that is that it was once one giant Chantry, and then Tevinter, you know, is very magic based, and Chantry doesn't like magic. So when the Chantry call out, like, "Hey, why are you having all these mages do stuff?" the Tevinter Chantry is like, "Fuck off," and they decide to splinter off. Which for some reason they splintered off so much that they made, like, whereas in the Dosian Chantry everything is like run by females, the Tevinter Chantry everything's run by males. Like, they just 180 completely. Which is kind of fun.
Yeah, and I guess the big theological distinction is Andraste is, like, you know, whatever, Bride of the Divine, etc. in the Andrastian Chantry, but in the Tevinter, the other Chantry, she was just a powerful mage. Is that kind of how they see it? And then that way they're more magic centric.
You know, I don't know about that, but I will say the one major difference is how they read the term. Magic exists to serve man, not rule over him.
Yeah.
And in the Tevinter Chantry, serve man. So the mages have to serve the people, which means they're all in power. Where in the Chantry, it's serve man being a servant. So it's kind of how they read.
Yeah,
those two lines.
Andrastian Chantry is like, well, it exists to serve man as a way to sort of that phrase is there as a way to keep magic in check, whereas the Tevinters interpreted it as like, well, it has to serve man, so we got to be doing a bunch of magic shit.
Yep. So that to me, that's the big difference. So I can't think of a time where they've talked about Andraste as just a power. Like, she was, I think, supposed to be a powerful mage, but like I can't recall if that's one of the major differences.
So this is one where I really like the question of, is it working for them? I mean, I can, as far as like, well, there's the two questions, right? Is it moral? Is it working for them?
Mm-hmm.
Is it working for them? I guess the right answer is it used to work for them. And then, the natural sort of progress happens where if you keep trying to rule over people, you get an uprising. Mm-hmm. And then it stops working for you in a big, bad way so that they had their empire considerably shrunken down from all of Thedas to still a large country, but they lost a lot of power. So I would say it's not working for them nearly as well as they thought that it was going to.
Mm-hmm. So that I think that's what makes Calpurnia really interesting, because she both wants to have no more slaves, but also make Tevinter great again. So what's her plan there? She did have a plan with Corypheus, but that fell through when she realized the truth of the situation. So what's she doing now? And what's going to happen? So, yeah, I almost feel like the big decision for Dragon Age 4, minus all the solo stuff, is going to be like, how is Tevinter going to either change its ways and be better, or try to stay fast in its ways and probably crumble? Or, if it doesn't crumble, is it going to start massing out onto the other nations? Like, Ravain's pretty weak. The qunari almost have the Ravain under its control. Tevinter could probably step in pretty quickly. So, would they, I think the only reason Tevinter hasn't been as powerful as it has been in the past is because the qunari are constantly fighting wars with it. For some reason, the qunari go away, Tevinter's going to look at it, the other nations surrounding it, like the Anderfels. What even happens in the Anderfels? Fucking nothing. They might as well take it over.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Which is also the question of, should you get rid of the qunari, because then Tevinter's going to get bored. Do the other nations kind of are okay with Tevinter being busy with the qunari? Because one, then they don't have to be busy with the qunari, and then they don't have to be busy with Tevinter.
Right.
So if you get rid of the equation, then what happens? Because one of them's going to take over. We just have to choose which one. This
is one of the super interesting things about politics and sort of pseudo-military strategy, is exactly what you're talking about right now, right? Like, is the enemy of my enemy my friend? Maybe not quite my friend, but they're kind of helping, right? As long as these two antagonistic forces are able to antagonize each other and not the rest of Thedas, maybe you kind of want that to happen for as long as possible, but so that way you don't have to deal with one or the other. Mm-hmm. And yeah, you're right. Just echoing what you said, to mention Calpurnia, it's one of the many reasons why she's so much more interesting than Samson as an antagonist in the game, is that she hits exactly on those two questions, right? Like, is Tevinter moral, and is it working for them? And she's essentially saying, we can make it more moral, and hopefully we can make it work better also. That's a tall order. That's, like you said, that's a real fucking tall order. But technically, at least as far as self-interested aims are, as far as her and her country, she kind of has the right idea. She's trying to make them more moral, and she's trying to make things work better for Tevinter, but also, what does work better for Tevinter entail? If it involves then conquering more countries, well, how moral is that, kind of a thing?
But she would be for it.
She would.
She was already be for it.
She absolutely was. That's a very interesting antagonist, somebody who has some serious flaws, but isn't like cartoon character rotten to the core.
It's a really quick aside, I kind of want to defend Samson, because I think Samson is actually pretty interesting. They just never actually went over it.
That's fair.
There's a really good idea there with Samson of just like a workforce that has been so abused that he's willing to forego kin and country just to avenge his brothers and sisters in arms. That's kind of interesting. They just never did anything with it. So, anyway.
What are, I mean, to talk about, because the flip side of just talking about countries that are sort of interested in their own interests is alliances and close alliances. I mean, what are the closest alliances in Thedas? Because Ferelden and Orlais at times ally together, at other times have tenuous, they're fighting against each other.
Ferelden and Orlais has always been bickering. Ferelden and Orlais has never gotten along. Free marches in Orlais. Free marches are just a bunch of city-states. Kind of like the America of Thedas, because each city-state's kind of like its own state. So I feel like some city-states are really in bed with Orlais, like Kirkwall in Orlais, really tight. Really the only free march city we know of a lot is really Kirkwall. really, they're all kind of argumentative. Like, Navarra and Orlais fight a lot. Ravane and Antiva are pretty chill with each other, I would say. Actually, Antiva and pretty much everybody, because there's like this whole story of I'm gonna forget her name. There was a queen of Antiva that wanted to make Antiva better, but she didn't Antiva's, it's really just known for its like wealth. That's really all it has. So what she did is that she just created a very large family, and she married off like a whole bunch of her grandchildren and children off into other royal families around Thedas. So pretty much most of Thedas is connected by blood through Antiva. So no one really wants to attack Antiva, because otherwise you're going to get your wife pissed at you.
It's a smart move by Antiva.
Mm-hmm. And so most people are pretty okay with Antiva. They will trade with Antiva. They do a lot of good things with Antiva. Pretty much everyone likes Antiva. Pretty much everyone also likes Orzammar, because they're the only ones that can mine lyrium. So pretty much everyone is in bed with the lyrium trade.
So first of all, major props to Antiva, right? I think that they have to give, if we're gonna again go to those two questions, is it moral and is it working? What a great strategy, right? Like, it's peaceful, it's not about war, you're not necessarily stockpiling, weapons or a big army to intimidate people. You're just like democratically and through diplomacy and through marriage making yourself everyone's friend.
Now, the problem with that, though, is that I do think it will eventually degrade, because as the families go on long enough, I mean, the probably the grandchildren of the woman who came from Antiva isn't going to be that attached to Antiva.
Right.
My grandmother came from Italy.
Invade
Italy. To Italy. Invade Italy. I don't know. I can't speak Italian. I like pizza, I guess. I don't know.
Oh, man. Oh, real quick, before I forget, just to clarify, because again, I can probably hear someone commenting about this. I don't know if I would compare the free marches to America necessarily.
All right.
Just because states can't make international deals. Like,
that's true.
They're still beholden to whatever the federal government. There really is no free marches analogy in the real world, which is interesting, because I think that would be really interesting from a political sense if we actually did have city-states. I think maybe the closest analogy you could stretch is like some of the smaller Eastern European countries that are really close together but small. Maybe. But yeah, the free marches is very unique in that sense. In that we don't actually have any true city-states except, I don't know, the Vatican, kind of.
The Vatican's weird. Anyway, have you ever been to Italy? Or
No.
I've actually been to Italy and been in the Vatican. It's such weird, like... You walk a line like, I'm in a new place. Walk another line, I'm back in Italy.
Yeah. Washington, D.C. is a real weird thing, too, in that it's not...
Oh, yeah, Washington.
It's like its own thing, too. It's weird.
Yeah.
Anyway. So Antiva, I think, is probably my favorite so far. I don't know if we want to go through in detail, but just, I don't know, like, Ferelden or Orlais kind of feel like the mainstay ones in that they're pretty balanced. They have national interest, but they're not overboard about it. Or am I wrong there?
Orlais kind of puts its fingers in a lot of pots and really does try to invade Navarra and Ferelden quite frequently, so I don't know about that. Ferelden is also rearing from the Blight, so it's just trying to survive at this point, which I think Ferelden has been in that state for quite a while, because they were taken over by Orlais not that long ago, and when its independence back, so they were trying to stabilize back into Ferelden, and after the Blight, it was like, oh, here we go again. So I feel like Ferelden's like fresh-faced, and which it is, for at least the youngest country. It's just really trying to survive at this point, which makes them, I think, feel a lot more pure. So I would like to see like Ferelden in like maybe 200 years of stability and see how they feel then.
Oh, you just made a great point. Now that's the American comparison right there.
Actually, yeah.
start off pure, fight against the world's greatest empire. Fast forward 200 years, and now we're sort of the world's greatest empire.
Whoops, my bad. Well, I also feel like this is something I wanted to talk about. How your PC, how your player characters, how nationalistic should they be? Because I feel like a lot of people went into Wicked Eyes, Wicked Hearts wanting to pick anyone but Gaspard, because they don't want Gaspard because he's going to overthrow Ferelden. But it's not like your PC's from Ferelden. We only had like Ferelden because we played I guess two Fereldens in Dragon Age Origins, Dragon Age 2. So we have a strong connection to Ferelden, but our PC really doesn't. So is it morally right to make Orlais weaker in that sense if we just want to protect Ferelden? Is that morally right? Is that really our place as Inquisitor?
It's a great fucking question.
And you can pretty much the same thing about the Grey Wardens. Like I'll be quite honest, I put Alistair on the throne just because Zenora pissed me off. That's not a really good reason to put someone on the throne.
No, it's not. Yeah.
No. And I wanted to be the princess because I'd romance Alistair because this is my fantasy world. I could do what I want. But let's be real, if I was a real Grey Warden, that would be the worst reason to put someone on the throne.
It's pretty rough, yeah.
So, in the Grey Wardens themselves are not supposed to meddle in politics, but they do anyway.
Yeah. That's a very interesting point about the Grey Wardens. Now, we could make the argument that the Inquisitor, the Inquisition is inherently a political organization, even if they try and say that they're not.
Yeah.
Like, they are a political and military organization, which makes the Inquisition a really weird thing.
Yeah.
And it sort of has this weird self-appointed justification to be involved in everything. Mm-hmm. I would make the argument that from that standpoint, not necessarily the nationalistic standpoint, and again, I fully recognize there are some problems with accepting the idea that the Inquisition just has carte blanche to be meddling in all these things. It kind of does it. But if I was role-playing, look, I am the Inquisitor at the end of the day. If I'm going to be the Inquisitor, I'm going to be a strong Inquisitor. Mm-hmm. I don't necessarily see it as doing Ferelden a favor as I see it trying to avoid war with Gaspard. Mm-hmm. And I know I've taken pro-Gaspard positions in the past because people got mad at me if I'm not mistaken. But I'm just saying I can see the argument of saying, well, Gaspard is more likely to lead. Well, I don't know. Is he more likely to lead to war, or is he just more likely to do it quicker?
Celine actively doesn't want war. I don't know about Brialla. But Celine, in her thing, she was ready to marry Kaelin to unite peace of Ferelden and Orlais. So yeah. I feel like she's pretty solidly not into wars. Brialla, I feel like is a little bit more cutthroat. At the same time, I don't know why she would do, she's more into the elves, and, Ferelden's actually pretty good at the elves, so I don't know why she'd want to fuck them over. Navarre, on the other hand, I don't know. But, Gaspard's ready to, if Ferelden's a weak link, goodbye. We're gonna take them over. So that's my best. That is my best shot at a moral argument for maybe opposing Gaspard. It's just that he's most likely to go to war, and just in general, you might want to avoid war, especially for when it's expansion purposes. Yeah. So I also feel like I want to talk to Loghain because Loghain's such an interesting character in regards to this topic, because he is where I feel like there is some good in being so in love with your country, you're willing to do anything for it. And Loghain is that idea gone way, way wrong. Loghain's actually a really great character in the which one is it?
Stolen Throne.
Yeah, the Stolen Throne. He has a great arc of just not really wanting to involve himself in politics, and then he just gets himself into politics because of Merrick, and then really just devoting himself to the point of really destroying his life, kind of, and everything he loves for the betterment of Ferelden. And Ferelden would not be where it is today were it not for his sacrifices.
Exactly.
And so when you go into Origins and he's willing to sacrifice everything, including his son-in-law, maybe even his daughter, not really though, that's another topic. It's totally within character, I think. Loghain's a sympathetic character because he's really just trying to defend this country that he's gave everything for.
Right.
And he really sees you and the Wardens as destroying that. And in a way we kind of are. It's really not the Warden's place to decide a crown. And yeah, Alistair was kind of a puppet for Eamon to try to take the throne, maybe. There's a lot of compelling arguments he makes. Now he did a lot of wrong, selling elves into slavery and a whole bunch of other stuff. I'm not going to say he was innocent, but none of his ideas weren't that crazy. He was a very compelling villain.
I completely agree with you, and I think I'm so glad you brought that up, and we didn't forget to bring up Loghain, because he's absolutely a hero in the context of his early life. He helped save Ferelden, and by no means do I think that I didn't think of introducing this topic just to make it like a bash on the idea of national self-interest at all. Like, to me, it's a really interesting idea that there are positives to that in some sense, which is why I like those two questions of like, is it moral and is it working? Because there's nothing wrong with saying that you have interest in your group, right? There's nothing wrong with having a sense of national pride or having a sense of like you, your family, your neighbors kind of an idea. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so like when we look at Ferelden hasn't tried to actively invade, correct?
Unless you want to count like the native peoples, like the Avar,
right?
The other one,
sure,
Chastened. But even then, like King Merrick and Alistair and Honora, they just mostly said like, listen, we're just trying to get our own shit together. Y'all have fun. Like they're mostly peace. Or like even Alistair visits the Avar and just kind of chills with them. Like they haven't really actively done that in a while, but like historically it has been there.
Right. So yeah, you're right. At least as far as native peoples, there's sort of that element of colonialism that you can never get around anywhere, right? There's always people somewhere. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I would say that Ferelden, for the most part, is, again, when you're talking about national actions, it's never really possible for a giant collective to be totally moral. That's kind of impossible. Too many people in there.
Which is what Trespasser was about.
Yeah, exactly. But generally speaking, I would say that Ferelden, as you mentioned, the youngest country sort of fighting back against a lot of these larger, more established forces, sometimes that national interest, you talk about Loghain as being someone who's willing to do anything to protect Ferelden. It is working fairly well for a young country that needed to sort of defend itself. And I don't think that it was immoral. I think where it starts to get immoral is, like you said, fast forward further and further into the future. At what point do those same aims start to sort of latch on to really damaging actions, which is what you have to be careful of. But you could make the argument that strong nationalism is what saved Ferelden in its early years.
I wouldn't even say you can make the argument. I think that is the argument.
That is what happened.
Is what saved Ferelden. So, because Merrick's whole arc is just learning to forego his personal pleasures in favor of his country, and that's why he has to kill Castiel.
So true.
Spoiler.
Well, like that's again like perfect example, right? Like you worded that exactly right, which is like the idea of, I know it's not in fashion in our modern society. Again, I don't want to touch too much on real world analogies, but like the idea of like country before self. It's not a popular idea anymore because rightly in a modern liberal democracy, I hesitate to use that word because people only contextualize it in the modern day sense. There was a long time where liberal just meant like not monarchies and shit, just democracy. That's what I mean by liberal democracy. I don't mean that in the specific modern day sense. I just mean generally.
You don't mean damn liberals.
Yeah, well, no, I don't have a problem either way, but people get touchy. So I just say that to say like the historical sense of liberal democracy. That is rightly the idea that you can self-determine. You're allowed to be an individualist. You're allowed to care about yourself first. You don't have to sacrifice your own personal aims for your country. But to me, the really awesome synergistic point is when you willfully do that. Right? You willfully choose to serve your greater community rather than just yourself. And I think that's sort of like the sweet spot for the positive aspects of nationalism. So anyway, you mentioning that about Merrick, right? Like put the country first. That's a really important thematic balancing, I think, that exists in Dragon Age as well as Mass Effect, to sort of counterbalance the benefits of, even broader collective cooperation with outside nations.
Yeah, we have not even touched on Mass Effect yet, so throw me that political Mass Effect stuff.
Well, I think a lot of it, there's a ton to talk about for Mass Effect 2. I think that it mirrors it a lot. Mm-hmm. I guess the way to start it is because Mass Effect is admittedly a human-centric story. And when I say that, it's like obviously it has to do with all of the different races, but BioWare has always been very upfront about saying it is about the other races, but it is about humanity's place in the galaxy. That's why you always play a human character. It's about empathizing with that human experience of stepping into a wider galaxy. And you were mentioning something earlier. Oh, it's Tevinters, right? Like there's the Venatori group that's like, we need to be more about, make Tevinter great again, which raises a question, right? is Tevinter super nationalist because they have that smaller group, or are they not because this smaller group is sort of arising out of the assertion on their part that people have gotten too lax on national pride? Well, you look at something like the Terra Firma Party or Cerberus with Mass Effect, and it's the same question. Is the Human Alliance, is humanity super all about humans for humans, or are they not? Because Cerberus's claim is that they're not. We've gotten too comfortable with aliens. We've gotten too much, too many alliances with the Citadel Council. We were just in a war with the Turians, and yet now we're kind of getting friendly with the Turians. So that sort of raises the question of, is humanity actually super diplomatic or super cooperative with the other races, or are they not? Which is even more interesting because I think almost universally from the perspective of the other species, we're totally not. We're still hard asses. We're still hard to work with. And yet in humanity, it's this question of like, well, maybe we're already getting too cooperative, or maybe we're still not enough. I don't know. So yeah, I just think, I don't know, that's the other thing that I think is worth mentioning. Those two questions again is it moral and is it working? There's no question that it's working for humanity, which is the really weird thing in Mass Effect, right? Like humanity has made these huge gains. Everybody talks about it in Mass Effect 1 and throughout the other games. Like humanity already has their own embassy, and like the Volus and the Elcor are still sharing one. Like, the military is already becoming a huge part of the peacekeeping efforts by the Citadel Council, and it's clear that that humanity coming onto the galactic stage, right? The first time humanity discovered the other species, it's because they started a war with the Turians, or you can argue who started it, but we went to war with the Turians, and then we sort of make peace, and then it's like instead of being punished in the way that maybe say the Krogan were, we were sort of welcomed into the fold very quickly. You can kind of see how the other species would be mad about that.
Oh yeah. Now, I can't remember that well. Is there a lot of choices where your shepherd can be like very nationalistic to like humanity or not? Like I don't, other than like talking with Ashley, I don't really remember that much.
Well, the end of Mass Effect 1's got to be the big one. Because in that case, you have the option to send in the Alliance fleet, which is certainly going to cause lots of human casualties and the destruction of lots of your ships, but it'll save the Council, or hold the fleet back. And don't save the Destiny Ascension, which kills the Council and a lot of other people on their ship. I always hate how it's like, you're going to kill the Council. You're going to kill the Council and everyone on the largest capital ship ever assembled, which is thousands, probably tens of thousands of people who are on the Destiny Ascension. So that's a huge one. And that is a choice that people actually remember and reference in 2 and 3, which is like you chose to value human lives over the lives of the Council and other species. And it's great because multiple factions remember that. If you choose to save the Destiny Ascension, there are humans, and I can't remember which NPCs specifically, but there are humans who will say, like, you didn't look out for the Human Alliance. You didn't look out for humanity. You sacrificed our people for quote unquote their people. And so both sides really remember that choice that you make.
I actually remember that choice now that you mentioned that, and I didn't choose the Council because I didn't understand what I was choosing.
Oh, you're not the only one. There's so many people that say that.
Yeah. Oh man, I'm just getting flashbacks of like all the times you're playing Mass Effect. Like, you didn't save the Council. I'm like, I didn't know.
Yeah, it's a really weird thing. It's like, send the ships in or send the ships in. This is a weird way that it's worded on the dialogue wheel.
Oh
man. So yeah, I would say that for humanity, it's like they're being a little bit hard to work with, and they definitely have that sort of quote unquote national interest, which is odd because in a science fiction setting, it's technically globalist, right? The idea is that the Human Alliance is made up of all the countries on Earth, and that everyone's sort of aligned together now. But yeah, it's definitely a human first interest, or at least it leans that way. But then you also make the argument that has definitely been working. To their benefit. And you could also make the argument that humanity being so strong and independent kind of ends up working in the benefit of the entire galaxy once the Reapers come around.
I was about to say, like, at the very least, the Andromeda initiative, I think, was human-led, right? So, like,
yeah.
Granted, there's, like, that weird investor thing. We don't know what that is, and we'll probably never know. But, I feel like there's going to be whole new politics in Andromeda, because while there is definitely like probably still some headbutts with all of the alien races, now I feel like it's going to be Milky Way versus Andromeda. The Angaran, like I feel like a lot of like well, maybe not a lot, but like there's a fair amount of like the Angara going, "Who are you? Why are you here? We don't trust outsiders for good reasons." And like granted, at the end you can kind of like unite them, but it's still kind of like sticky, I feel like. At the same time, if we just go back to the Milky Way aliens, like humanity made this and it's humanity made, and like humanity's the only one that gets there for the most part without a hitch. Like the other arcs that you can choose not to save, if I remember correctly, minus I think like the Asari one or Solarian one, I don't remember which one.
Mm-hmm.
But you can just not save them. Like that, you can complete the main. In my memory, you can complete the main story.
That's
without
correct.
Saving a bunch of them.
Yeah,
and that kind of sucks. Like if you only care about humanity, you could easily just kill off all of the or most of the like the Asari and the Krogans. You know.
Yeah.
Just because. Why not?
Yeah. No, that is true. But I do feel like with Andromeda, it's a lot more buddy-buddy between all the races, right? I mean, there's some tension with the Krogan, but it gets way more united in Andromeda.
Which in some part, I think sucks. Because it sounds kind of not hand-holdy, but like hand-wavy, like, oh, you know, they're all fine now. At the same time, I can kind of see it happening. Maybe not like immediately like how it was shown, but like if every, like, I feel like people come together when they all have something to work on, and everyone there is just trying to survive, and so they don't have time for past prejudices.
Right.
I feel like that is something that makes sense and could totally be worked out, but I feel like because they didn't even touch on it and it's not like a part of the story, at least not that I remember, then it feels cheap. So like I while I can totally see it being like a real thing that would have happened, I don't think they handled it well.
So that's a great call out, is that I don't necessarily think that it's better, at least not fictionally, right? We can argue whether or not it's better in universe, but fictionally it just got way more boring.
Yeah.
Like it just got way more boring.
I think it would have been a lot more interesting if you as the Pathfinder had to try and unite everyone. Like there was an element of that with like the rebels and the main base, but I think it would have been much more interesting if it was actually racially divided. And then trying to recruit, and that would make so much more sense of like getting the arcs of like, oh, Asari, who are already here, like, of course humanity's here to help you because, look, I just saved all of your people. Like, that just makes so much sense. But no, it's actually hidden in Korra's fucking side quest. Like, the only reason we ended up saving the Asari arc was because Korra served with them. And
she's an Asari.
Yeah, she wants to be an Asari.
Yeah.
Again.
Yeah, like, I mean, we talked about it, right? Like, that granularity and that sort of, the rough edges of the Mass Effect universe got really smoothed out. I feel like Mass Effect got a lot more bland in Andromeda because AI was no longer a tough question to answer, and cooperation between the species was no longer a tough question to answer. Mm-hmm. And thematically, that's a huge chunk of what the science fiction in Mass Effect is supposed to be about, is those tough questions. And they were just, as you said, hand-wavy, kind of like, no, AI is your friend. No, all the species are good.
And even if they wanted to do the hand wavy for the Milky Way races and wanted to go straight to the like things being rough with the Angaran, things weren't really that rough with the Angaran. Let's be real here.
No,
like we were able to land on their planet without really incident. Like they held us up at gunpoint, but like that was like the max of it. And then the Angaran were like, yeah, you're cool, that's fine. Which you had to save the whatever. Moshai or whatever.
Yeah.
But that was like...
Well, we also kind of dicked our way into their lives, if you really think about it. Like, we kind of showed up and, you know, we helped get the Moshai, and then she was our friend, and then she kind of like, everybody shut up, these are my friends.
Pretty much,
and we just kind of forced our way in there. So that's a really good point that you kind of started us on, of like the unity, quote unquote, even if it was hand wavy in Andromeda. And I want to touch on that with Mass Effect rather than going through one by one, because I think we kind of did that with Dragon Age. I want to zoom out for the macro level for Mass Effect more. Mm. There's this really interesting conversation that you can have with Javik about the Prothean Empire, because it is an empire. It's undeniably an empire. He describes it in great detail about how there are sort of lesser races that are sort of brought into the fold, and it is all utilitarian and it's all authoritarian. Javik is confused when he's looking at Shepard's struggle against the Reapers, because he's going, wait a minute, you have to help the Krogan so they'll help the Turians so the Turians will help you. Like, why doesn't the leader just command everyone to fight the Reapers? Mm-hmm. And Shepard's like, well, that's not really how it works. Like, we're all kind of, it's like a tenuous relationship. We kind of have alliances. Sometimes we fight with each other. We kind of have to convince each other to do stuff. And Javik's like, this is illogical. He's like, this doesn't make any sense. and you get to, as Shepard, sort of remind him, like, yeah, but your way lost. Like, your way didn't work. And ours still might. And you have to convince Javik of that, because Javik really feels like, well, no, you get everybody together under one umbrella and you become as united as possible, and that's the best way to win. But the Shepard argument, the player argument that you get to make is, yes, sometimes we have a tenuous alliance. Yes, sometimes we bicker. Yes, sometimes we flat out are trying to fight each other. But having all of these distinct cultures means that we have different types of innovations. The Solarians are much better at this other thing. The Asari are much better at this other thing. Humans have their advantages. And we all have those advantages in a sense because we're competing against each other, right? Because we don't have these super tight alliances, and we know that an ally could turn into an adversary at a moment's notice. We're all sort of trying to make ourselves as strong as possible individually, so that if we do have to combine forces, we actually end up stronger that way. I think that's a really strong argument for the quote-unquote nationalist, or for the quote-unquote self-interested route, which is that you probably want that most of the time, as long as everybody knows well enough to put their shit aside when it really gets real. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of, and I think what to kind of connect that to the Andromeda piece, it's also very interesting to see what happens when you unite everyone, in my opinion, too much in Andromeda, because once you form one bigger group, there really isn't that much care taken to not overrule the Angara. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, once the Krogan and Solarians and Turians and humans all get together in the Asari and the Andromeda Initiative, they're just kind of like, the Helios cluster is ours now. Like, there's no real regard for the Angarans, because they're, at this point, you're just sort of like this one giant assimilating machine where you just roll through anybody else and go like, well, you can join us and be a part of our big happy family. But the Moshae is very correct if you don't pick her as the ambassador to just be like, you guys came in here and now you're running shit and you really are not regarding us at all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Which is probably one of the more interesting plot details of Mass Effect Andromeda that came in like the last 5 minutes and never talked about again.
Right,
so.
right.
Now I'm just imagining a Mass Effect Andromeda where it kind of echoed the original series, where the main plot of the game was, you had to find the arcs, but really just trying to unite the station of like the different races to be like, can we please stop fighting each other and work on the Kett?
Yeah.
That way, like the very end of the like that, the final battle where like all your friends coming back of like, oh, here's the Asari, here's everybody, like that would have felt much more rewarding than what it did.
It would have been really nice, and it would have required a big rewrite of the game. It would have been really nice if the races had fractured before they left, so that it started off as a joint initiative, but the Asari got mad so they left, the Turians got mad so they left, the Krogan, everybody separated, and so you have all of these different initiatives going to Andromeda, and then maybe some of them ally with the Angara, but you don't want to, or you ally with the Angara, but a couple of the other ones don't want to, and you have the option to bring everyone together under a loose alliance. But it's not everyone just coming in all allied together at once, because I think you could make the argument that if the Milky Way races were more fractured, it actually would have ended up being more fair to the Angara.
Yeah. But I think we have to re-erase the counter of times we've rewritten Andromeda on this podcast.
You know what? We keep making it better every time. That's what I say.
It's too bad we have none of the skills to make it a reality.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Because you know what game makers love is people with ideas.
Yeah, oh yeah, people who have podcasts that tell them how to remake their game.
It's so simple. Why didn't you just do this extremely complicated thing when you only had a year to make the game?
Of course.
Duh.
None of our great ideas would have been hard to implement. Come on.
Oh, come on now. You're just lazy.
Oh, there's some Reddit person who doesn't know we're being sarcastic.
The knuckles are turning white, getting ready to type in that bad review.
Split the Veil called you guys out, said you're lazy.
God, yeah, that does sound like one of those terrible like clickbait articles. Like, fan podcast calls out Bioware as being lazy. Fans react. Like, like, oh, okay, thanks.
Do we have anything else that we want to say wrapping up on this topic?
I don't think so. Like, I feel like we exhausted everything I wanted to touch on. What about you?
I don't think we ever talked about elves and dwarves as nations separately.
Oh shit, you're right. Yeah.
We didn't talk about the Qunari, but I mean that's Qunari.
No,
we talked. No, I'm sorry. We talked about
the
Quarians. Sorry, it starts with a Q. It's got some IA in there. I got confused. Quarians. We didn't talk about Quarians, but I mean, whatever. Long story short, it's not working that well for them. they're really separate. It would probably be better if they could find a way to integrate more. But then again, they kind of help save the galaxy because they have some tech / resources again that no one else has because they've kept themselves separate. So I would say again, there's kind of a case for it's rough being separate, but at the end of the day, they kind of have some unique talents to bring to the table because of their self-reliance.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And at least with the elves, like I feel like I don't know, like there's a whole issue with like the ancient Elven Empire and how did that get about, but I feel like a lot of that's just speculation because we don't really know that much about the ancient Elven Empire. Which, yeah, I would really like to hear more about the ancient Elven Empire and see, like, what nations they had. Were people divided by what gods they worshipped, or were they divided by something else? Who knows? Like, I don't know. I just really like the elves a lot. No one else does. That's not true. But,
I think people love the elves a little too much, and then there's that vocal minority that's like, everybody loves the elves too much.
Yeah, that's fair. Like, yeah. the amount, can you imagine? Because Dragon Age Inquisition at first was only pitched as a human-only protagonist. Can you imagine? Like, there's so many people now consider female Lavellan to be like the main, like that is the canon protagonist for Inquisition. And like she wasn't even originally in the original pitch of Inquisition, which just blows my mind. Anyway, that's another story. All right, Jordan, I think it's time to end it. Where can they find you?
The folks can find me at The Exalted March on YouTube, of course, and under The Exalted March on Twitter and Instagram and Reddit. Where can folks find you, Caitie?
You can find me on YouTube as Ghildirthalen and Twitter as Ghildirthalen, and that's pretty much only where you can contact me at this point. So, guys, with that, Darish.